The moment I heard my deputy on the line with a complaint about my farm, I nearly spilled my coffee. At first I thought he was messing with me. Bobby Ray had a knack for blowing things out of proportion just to get a rise out of me. But the way he was stammering told me this was serious. Someone had actually reported my property, and it was no random person. Karen Simmons. I almost chuckled. Almost. Bobby Ray, suppressing a chuckle himself, said, "I told her that. She said, and I quote, 'Even the sheriff isn't above the law.'" That made me laugh out loud. Let me guess. She doesn't even know whose farm she's complaining about. "Not a clue," Bobby confirmed. "She's out here, arms crossed, furious, demanding justice." Justice? Over what? I sighed, grabbed my hat, and headed out. If there was one thing I knew about Karen Simmons, it was that she could turn a minor issue into a full-blown scandal. By the time I reached the gate, Bobby Ray was standing off to the side, arms folded, watching Karen argue with thin air. She was pacing furiously, wagging her finger at nothing, as if she were rehearsing for a courtroom scene. "Aha, the sheriff's finally here," she declared as soon as she spotted my truck. "I demand immediate action." I stepped out in my dusty work clothes and leaned against the hood. "Karen, what exactly is the problem here?" She squinted at me as if she had just noticed my presence, then turned to Bobby. "Who's this?" "That's Sheriff Jake Lawson." Bobby snorted. Her face went blank. She looked back at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. This is your farm?" "Yep," I said, tipping my hat. "Now, what's this urgent crime spree I'm supposedly running?" Her composure returned in an instant. "Well, that doesn't change anything," she huffed. "Even you have to follow the law. I've been keeping records, and I have proof that your farm is a public nuisance." I crossed my arms. "Is that so?" Karen pulled out a notepad from her purse. "First of all, your rooster is in clear violation of noise ordinances. It crows at ungodly hours, 5 a.m. sharp." Bobby Ray cleared his throat discreetly. "Karen, that's just what roosters do." She shot him an incredulous look. "In a civilized society." "Really?" Without missing a beat, she turned the page of her book. "And can we discuss the odor?" "The smell of manure is horrendous. I can catch a whiff from my backyard." I raised an eyebrow at her. "Karen, you live 2 miles away." "Exactly. That's how bad it is." I bit back a chuckle. "Anything else on your mind?" "Oh, there's loads more," she declared, her tone suddenly theatrical. "You have unregistered animals on that farm." I saw a pig running loose without a leash. "That's a safety concern." Bobby Ray stifled a laugh, his face flushed with effort. "Karen," I spoke as calmly as I could manage, "that pig's name is Bacon Bits. He's my pet." "No leash because this is a farm?" "Really?" She huffed, arms crossed. "And I suppose you have some sort of paperwork proving that pig's allowed to be here?" I met her gaze, deadpan. "Karen, it's a farm." "Well, I'll be filing a formal complaint," she declared defiantly. "I'll have this place inspected, and if there's even one infraction, I'll make sure this farm is shut down for—" "Good." Bobby Ray let out a low whistle. "Are you sure you want to take that path, Karen?" She lifted her chin, unwavering. "Absolutely." I sighed, losing my cool. "Karen, you realize you just called the cops on the sheriff, right?" For a heartbeat, uncertainty crossed her face, but she squared her shoulders and shot back. "Then you, of all people, should know the law better." I rubbed my temples in frustration. "Do you actually have a reason for this, or are you just bored and looking for things to complain about?" Her lips pressed into a tight line. "The reason is straightforward, Sheriff. Rules are rules, and no one is above them. Not even you," she added, turning on her heel and leaving as if she had just achieved a grand triumph. I exhaled slowly. Bobby Ray chuckled softly. "You know she's not backing down, right?" "Oh, I know," I muttered, torn between amusement and concern. The following morning my answer arrived. I woke to the sound of vehicles rolling up to my property. With coffee in hand, I stepped outside and nearly choked when I spotted a line of county inspectors, clipboards ready, standing at my gate, and leading the charge, grinning like a cat that just caught its prey, was none other than Karen. "Morning, Sheriff," she called brightly. "Hope you don't mind a routine inspection." I let out a slow breath. Seriously? Bobby Ray ambled up beside me, cradling his own cup of coffee, taking in the scene like he was watching the most absurd parade ever. Well, looks like Karen's officially declared war. I took a long sip of coffee and muttered, "Guess it's time we fight back." The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, my morning coffee just beginning its magic, when I spotted a lineup of county officials at my front gate, looking like they were gearing up for a raid. Karen stood at the front grinning like she had just hit the jackpot. Behind her were 2 health inspectors, a zoning officer, and even someone from animal control. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to roll my eyes. Bobby Ray, still in his pajamas, strolled over, sipping his coffee as though nothing was amiss. "Well, looks like the cavalry's here. Should I grab a white flag, or are we going to fight this one out?" Karen cleared her throat loudly. "Sheriff Lawson, we're here for an official inspection of your property based on multiple reports of code violations." She waved her clipboard, like it held some earth-shattering news. "I trust you'll cooperate fully." I stared at her, then glanced at the officials trailing behind, all wearing expressions that screamed they'd been dragged into this mess by Karen's insistence. I exhaled slowly, forcing a smile. "Of course, Karen. I have nothing to hide. Let's get this over with." With a smug nod, Karen stepped aside as the inspectors began their walkthrough. First stop was the barn, where my cows eagerly awaited their morning feeding. The health inspector, a weary-looking woman who'd clearly dealt with worse, glanced around and jotted a few notes. "Cows look healthy, no signs of mistreatment, no excessive waste buildup." Karen frowned. "Are you sure? I distinctly recall seeing an unsanitary pile of—" The inspector raised a hand. "Ma'am, this is a farm. Manure is kind of expected." Karen huffed but fell silent. Next, it was time for the animal control officer to check out Bacon Bits, my beloved pet pig. The officer scratched his head, observing the pudgy little guy who was rolling in the dirt with absolute glee. He looks fine to me," the officer muttered. Karen crossed her arms. "I demand to see his paperwork." I sighed and pulled a folder from my truck. "Here's his registration, vaccination records, and proof he's legally allowed to be here." Karen snatched the papers, scanning them as if she might uncover some hidden loophole. Finally, she pushed the papers back toward me. "Just because you got that doesn't mean you're off the hook yet." Bobby Ray let out a low whistle. Wow, she really knows how to play the courtroom villain. Karen shot him an annoyed glance. We moved to where the zoning officer was checking my property lines, and Karen was right there, almost crowding him. "I'm telling you, there has to be something illegal going on here. An unauthorized structure, maybe?" The zoning officer glanced at me wearily. "Sheriff, do you have any unpermitted buildings on this land?" "Nope." He nodded. "All clear, then." Karen's expression shifted to frustration. She was losing ground, and she realized it. But instead of pulling back, she brought out her ace, a printout of some obscure environmental regulation. "What about this?" she declared, waving the document at the health inspector. "County law says that too much livestock waste near a natural water source breaks environmental safety codes. And if I recall correctly, Sheriff Lawson has a pond right over there." Everyone turned to look at the pond, where my ducks were happily splashing around. The health inspector sighed and wandered over, taking several samples. After some time checking her readings, she shrugged. "Water's clean. No contamination." Karen's eye twitched. "But, ma'am," the inspector interjected, rubbing her temple, "I think we're all set here." Karen's jaw was clenched so tightly I thought she might break a tooth. One by one, the officials gathered their things, giving me apologetic nods as they left. The health inspector gently patted my shoulder. Sorry for the hassle, Sheriff. Have a good day. But Karen wasn't finished. She turned to me, her glare as cold as ice. Don't think this is over. I crossed my arms. Karen, you just dragged half the county out here and wasted their time. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? For the first time, she hesitated, just for a moment, but I saw it. That's when it hit me. Karen wasn't merely following rules. She had a hidden agenda. I stepped closer. Karen, what do you really want? She scoffed. Because rules exist for a reason. And cut the act. I narrowed my eyes. You're up to something. Karen's lips pressed into a tight line, but I noticed her fingers twitching as she gripped her clipboard just a bit too tightly. Then she pivoted sharply. You'll find out soon enough. And just like that, she was gone. Bobby Ray watched her leave, his head shaking slightly in disbelief. What do you think she's after? I frowned, my gaze lingering on the rising dust from her car. I had a feeling this wasn't just about my farm. The next day, the truth came to light. The town council had called a meeting, which was unusual unless something significant was on the agenda. Out of sheer curiosity, I arrived early and took a seat at the back. As the meeting began, Karen stood up, cleared her throat, and made her intentions clear. I'm proposing a rezoning of the land around my property to facilitate a new community development project. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The mayor raised an eyebrow. What kind of development are we talking about? Karen flashed an overly sweet smile. A high-end yoga retreat and wellness center, of course, a haven for tranquility, relaxation, and organic living. But, as she continued, this project simply can't move forward without addressing the issues posed by the farm next door. My teeth clenched at her words. Bobby Ray leaned over and whispered, She's trying to force you off your own land. I took a deep breath, working to maintain a calm facade. I should have seen this coming. Karen wasn't interested in the regulations. She was focused on evicting me. The mayor stroked his chin, contemplating. Well, Karen, that land's been farmed for generations. I'm not so sure about... Karen waved dismissively. Oh, I'm certain we can find a solution. Perhaps some financial incentives for the sheriff to relocate? The room fell silent. I slowly stood up, addressing her directly. Karen. She turned back, feigning surprise. Oh, Sheriff. What a surprise to... See you here. I stepped closer. Let me be clear. This farm is not going anywhere, and neither am I. She offered a sweet smile. Oh, we'll see about that. Thus began the real battle. Once Karen had declared war on my farm, I understood she wouldn't relent until either she triumphed or embarrassed herself in the process. And judging by her past actions, I wasn't banking on the latter. She had already squandered county resources, insisted on pointless inspections, and now she was aiming straight for my livelihood by attempting to change the zoning laws. As I left the town hall meeting, I didn't have anything else to say to her. There was little point in arguing with someone convinced of their own righteousness, but that didn't mean I was prepared to roll over. Outside, Bobby Ray was leaning against my truck, arms crossed, waiting for me. Well, he remarked, eyeing Karen as she chatted up one of the council members. That went about as expected. I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. She's not just fussing over some zoning issue. Nobody goes this hard over a rooster and a pig. Bobby slid into the passenger seat, his hand on his chin, deep in thought. You think she's hiding something? He asked as I turned the key, the engine springing to life. Yeah. I spent the next few days digging around. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure to give her a taste of her own medicine, legally speaking, of course. I sifted through public records, land sales, business filings, anything that could reveal her game plan. It didn't take long to uncover something intriguing. Karen had recently submitted several permit applications under a newly formed LLC, Serenity Valley Wellness Retreat. And where was this retreat going? Right next to my farm. But there was a snag. The environmental impact reports for her land were decidedly unfavorable. Too much runoff, unstable soil, and contamination risks meant her property was far from ideal for her proposed retreat, unless she shifted that burden onto someone else. Then it hit me. Karen wasn't just after my land to clear the way for her fancy retreat. She wanted to offload the environmental limitations onto my property so her land could be a clean slate. If my farm got labeled as a nuisance or an environmental threat, she'd gallop in, claiming her place was the better option, and suddenly, all her problems would vanish, along with my home. I leaned back, staring at the report in my hands. Bobby Ray, who had been pacing the room, stopped and whistled low. "Well, that explains a lot," he said, a knowing look in his eyes. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, and now I know how to take her down." It was time to act. First things first, I needed to gather evidence. If Karen wanted to play the game, I'd play to win. I needed solid proof that she was trying to game the system. It turned out she wasn't as careful as she thought. With a little help from a few reliable friends in the county office, I managed to snag some documents. It became clear that Karen had been illegally dumping waste from her smoothie bar right into a protected wetlands area behind her property. The same woman demanding environmental accountability had been breaking the rules herself. It was almost too easy. The next town council meeting was buzzing. Word of Karen's antics had spread like wildfire, and everyone was eager to see her. Next move. She walked in with her signature confidence, her designer bag swinging at her side like she owned the place. I let her have the floor first. She dove into her usual spiel about preserving the town's integrity, creating spaces for mindfulness and wellness, and relocating disruptive agricultural elements for the greater good. The council members nodded along, some more engaged than others, but when she started talking about rezoning, I stood up. "Karen," I interrupted, my voice slicing through her rehearsed pitch. "Before we proceed with this proposal, I need to address a few points with the council." She turned, her smile now a bit forced. "Oh, Sheriff, I didn't realize you had such an interest in zoning laws." I raised a thick file in response. "I do when they're being mishandled." The room fell silent. I approached the front and handed the folder to the mayor. This contains a report outlining several environmental violations on Karen's property, including illegal waste dumping into protected wetlands. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. The smug look on Karen's face faded. The mayor flipped through the pages, his frown deepening with each line. "Karen, these are significant accusations." She let out a sharp laugh. "This is ridiculous. Clearly you're just trying to undermine me." I tilted my head. "Are you sure about that? These reports are from the county's environmental agency. Would you like me to call someone to confirm them?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. The mayor sighed. "Well, Karen, given this information, it seems we won't be moving forward with any zoning changes right now." Her face turned crimson as she spun on her heel and marched toward the exit. But just before she slipped away, Bobby Ray called out, "Oh, Karen, one last thing." She halted but didn't look back. Bobby grinned. "Since you care so much about the rules, you might want to check your mailbox. A fine is likely on its way." Laughter erupted in the room. Karen flung the doors open and disappeared into the night. The battle was over. A week later, life on my farm resumed its usual rhythm. No more surprise inspections, no more zoning threats, and best of all, no more Karen. She had gone quiet after the ordeal, nursing her wounds alone. I expected she'd return eventually, but for now, the peace was a welcome relief. Bobby Ray leaned against the fence, watching the bacon bits waddle around the yard. "I've got to say, boss, that was some of your best work." I smirked. "It felt pretty satisfying, didn't it?" He nodded. "But I've got to ask, was naming the town barbecue after her really necessary?" I chuckled. "Oh, absolutely." The Karen's farewell feast was a massive hit. The entire town came out to enjoy it, laughing at the absurdity of the past few weeks while feasting on the best ribs and smoked pork around. And for a final touch of irony, I made sure the bacon bits got a little seat of honor alive and well. Justice had never tasted so sweet.